I planted those trees with my grandfather back in the summer of 1983. I was 10 years old, skinny little kid with grass stains on my jeans and dirt packed under my fingernails, and my granddad Earl kept telling me, "Plant slow, son. Trees remember the hands that put 'em in the ground." At the time, I thought that sounded like old man poetry, the kind of thing you nod at without really hearing it. But 40 years later, I understood exactly what he meant, because those trees remembered us, and I remembered every single one of them the day I came home and found them slaughtered. See, I live out in western Tennessee, little farmhouse tucked along a ridge overlooking Belmere Lake. Not fancy, not rich, just quiet. The kind of place where mornings smell like cedar bark and wet soil instead of car exhaust and Starbucks syrup. My grandfather built the house himself after Vietnam, and those timber trees behind the property weren't decoration. They blocked winter wind, held the hillside together during storm season, and honestly, they gave me privacy from people with too much money and not enough decency. Then the developers showed up. That's always how these stories start now, isn't it? Somebody in loafers and mirrored sunglasses sees untouched land, and suddenly they start talking about unlocking value, like God accidentally forgot to monetize the mountains. A company called Ridgeline Horizon bought the hill above my property and announced plans for luxury glass homes. All steel beams, infinity pools, giant windows facing the lake like oversized iPhones sitting on the horizon. Their billboard right off Highway 22 literally said, "Uninterrupted panoramic water views." Yeah, uninterrupted by regular people, apparently. About a month after construction started, a woman named Vanessa Mercer knocked on my front door, wearing a spotless white hard hat that looked like it had never survived a real workday in its life. She smiled the way corporate people smile when they're about to ruin your afternoon. Real polished, real rehearsed. She unfolded blueprints on the hood of her SUV and pointed toward my cedar line. "Mr. Bennett," she said, "the tree coverage is significantly impacting the visual corridor for future homeowners." Visual corridor? Listen to that nonsense. That's rich people language for, "Your trees are blocking my clients' sunset selfies." I told her those trees were protected timber, county registered, planted decades ago, and she gave me this little nod like she cared, then hit me with the classic developer move, fake compromise. "Well, maybe we can trim them back a bit." I said no before she even finished the sentence. Not maybe, not partially. Hell no. Those trees survived tornado seasons, droughts, lightning strikes, and 2 generations of Bennetts. They weren't getting butchered because somebody paying $2 million wanted a prettier wine-drinking view from their balcony. Vanessa's smile changed after that. It got thinner, colder, like I'd broken some invisible social rule by not immediately surrendering to people richer than me. And that right there, that's the part folks don't talk about enough. Wealthy developers aren't used to hearing no, especially not from somebody living in an old farmhouse with peeling paint and muddy boots. To them, resistance feels disrespectful. 3 weeks later, I drove into town for feed supplies and fencing wire. Was gone maybe 4 hours. Stopped at Miller's Diner on the way back for coffee and pie. Nothing unusual. But when I turned onto my gravel road that evening, something felt wrong before I even saw it. The ridge looked brighter somehow. Empty. My stomach dropped so hard it felt physical. I slammed the truck into park and got out before the engine even stopped running. The entire timber line was gone. Gone. Not trimmed. Not thinned out. Wiped clean off the earth like somebody took an eraser to 40 years of my life. Massive cedar trunks were stacked beside the dirt road like dead elephants waiting for transport. Fresh sawdust covered the hillside. Branches scattered everywhere. And the smell. Man, if you've never smelled freshly cut cedar from trees older than you are, it's hard to explain. It smells alive. And that made it worse. I remember standing there shaking, hearing chainsaws still whining in the distance while workers loaded logs onto flatbeds like it was just another Tuesday. One of the guys actually waved at me. Waved. Like neighbors borrowing sugar. I walked uphill and saw the stumps. Dozens of them. Raw and pale against the soil, each one looking like an open wound. I swear to God, I nearly blacked out from anger. 40 years. 40 years destroyed in a single afternoon because some rich strangers wanted a cleaner line of sight to the water. And the craziest part? They thought they'd get away with it. They honestly believed a guy like me wouldn't fight back. But my grandfather taught me something else besides planting trees. Never let arrogant people mistake kindness for weakness. Now, before I get into what happened next, let me explain something because a lot of people watching this are probably thinking, how does something like that even happen legally? And honestly, that's exactly what these companies count on: confusion. According to standard procedure, any major land clearing near a protected slope usually requires boundary verification, environmental review, erosion assessment, especially in lake communities where runoff can damage surrounding property. But here's the trick developers use all the time. They move fast, create pressure, and assume regular homeowners either don't understand the system or can't afford to challenge it. From a legal perspective, cutting timber across a property line isn't some little paperwork mistake that can turn into trespassing, destruction of protected resources, civil liability, even environmental penalties depending on the county. And psychologically, this is a classic power imbalance move. This is a psychological trap where wealthy organizations weaponize confidence. They speak in polished corporate language, throw around permits and technical jargon, and make you feel like resisting is pointless because they already own the process. Most people back down right there. They start doubting themselves. They think, well, maybe I misunderstood the boundary. That's what Vanessa expected me to do. Problem was, my grandfather didn't raise an idiot, and he definitely didn't spend 40 years planting cedar trees, just so some luxury real estate brochure could erase them overnight. The next morning, I drove straight to the construction site before sunrise, still running on maybe 2 hours of sleep and pure rage. The workers were already out there pouring concrete footings like nothing happened, country music blasting from a radio, nail guns popping in the distance, and the second I stepped out of my truck, every conversation stopped. You ever walk into a place and feel people suddenly become very interested in avoiding eye contact? Yeah, it was that kind of silence. I found the site supervisor near a stack of lumber, big guy named Travis, beard, reflective vest, coffee cup in hand, acting irritated before I even opened my mouth. I asked him who authorized the cutting. He gave me this shrug like we were discussing weather. Said they were told the timber line fell inside Ridgeline Horizon's development boundary. Just casually. Like destroying decades-old protected trees was equivalent to mowing the wrong lawn. I told him he was either lying or dangerously incompetent because those trees sat well within my property. He smirked and said, "Well, sir, that's not what the maps say." Maps. That word stuck in my head the whole drive home because my grandfather didn't trust maps printed by strangers sitting in offices 2 counties away. He trusted steel markers buried in dirt. Back in the 70s, he personally walked that ridge with a survey crew carrying chains and transit scopes, and I remembered him showing me the property pins when I was a teenager. "These matter more than paper," he'd say. "Paper changes when money gets involved." So I grabbed a shovel and headed up the ridge myself. Took me almost 3 hours digging through roots and wet clay, but eventually I hit metal, cold steel buried beneath the soil exactly where he said it would be. That's when I knew somebody was about to have a very expensive problem. 2 days later, I hired an independent surveyor named Carl Dempsey, old school guy with nicotine fingers and zero patience for developer nonsense. Carl spent an entire afternoon measuring the ridge while construction crews kept watching from uphill balconies like nervous crows. Then came the orange flags. Bright fluorescent markers stretched across the hillside one after another, and every single stump, every single one, sat nearly 12 feet inside my property line. 12 feet. Not inches. Not some blurry technical overlap. They had clear-cut protected timber on private land because rich buyers wanted a cleaner sunset photo for their listing brochures. Carl looked at me, pulled off his cap, and said, "Buddy, they're cooked." And that's when things started unraveling fast. I filed complaints with the county planning office, environmental services, zoning enforcement, everybody I could think of. Suddenly, Ridgeline Horizon wasn't selling dream homes anymore. They were answering questions. Inspectors started crawling all over that hill like ants on roadkill. Soil samples, permit reviews, drone imaging. And here's where karma entered the story wearing muddy boots. See, those cedar roots had been stabilizing that ridge for decades. Remove them too quickly and the ground loses structure, especially near lakeside slopes with heavy clay underneath. But apparently nobody at Ridgeline Horizon thought that far ahead, because about a week after the logging, a massive storm rolled through Belmere County. Not biblical or anything, just one of those long cold spring rains that soaks the earth for 12 straight hours. Around midnight, I heard this deep cracking sound outside, almost like thunder underground. Next morning, I walked outside and saw fresh mud sliding down the ridge toward the construction site. Whole sections of loosened soil were collapsing beneath the unfinished mansions. Wooden framing tilted sideways. Gravel pathways disappeared under sludge. One retaining trench split wide open like somebody ripped a zipper through the hillside. I actually stood there laughing for a second. Couldn't help it. These idiots spent millions engineering luxury homes and forgot the one thing holding the hill together was the forest they destroyed. By noon, county inspectors arrived and shut the entire project down with an emergency stop work order. Red notices went up on every structure. Construction froze instantly. Concrete trucks turned around at the gate. Investors started showing up in expensive SUVs screaming into phones while workers packed equipment into trailers. Half-finished mansions sat abandoned overlooking the lake like giant glass skeletons. Then Vanessa came back. And let me tell you something. Confidence looks real different when attorneys start billing by the hour. She pulled into my driveway wearing jeans this time instead of corporate slacks, carrying no blueprints, no rehearsed smile, no polished visual corridor nonsense. Just stress. Pure stress. She stood on my porch holding a folder against her chest and apologized for the miscommunication. Miscommunication. That word almost made me choke. Like 40 years of timber accidentally wandered into chainsaws all by itself. Then she offered compensation. Timber value reimbursement. Restoration estimates. Settlement discussions. Real careful legal language. But honestly, by that point money wasn't the issue anymore. It stopped being about trees the second they decided my home mattered less than their buyer's view. I looked past her shoulder toward those unfinished mansions sitting up on the ridge, and something clicked in my brain. See, according to county erosion regulations, once slope destabilization occurs, adjacent property owners are allowed to install protective reinforcement structures to prevent further land movement. Permanent structures. Large ones. And suddenly I had an idea so petty, so beautifully excessive. I almost smiled. I told Vanessa I wasn't interested in a payout yet because I needed time to protect my property. She didn't understand what I meant until the trucks arrived. Flatbeds started rolling onto my land 3 days later carrying pallets of gray cinder blocks and reinforced concrete supports. One truck became 3. 3 became 7. Locals slowed down on the county road just to stare at what looked like a military construction project unfolding beside my farmhouse. And every inch of it was legal. Completely legal. Engineers approved the plans. County officials stamped the permits. Because technically speaking, I was building emergency erosion control barriers along a compromised ridge line. That's the beauty of bureaucracy. Once the paperwork favors you, rich people suddenly hate the system they used against everybody else. For the next month, crews worked sunrise to sunset, stacking reinforced retaining walls across the hillside in massive staggered tiers nearly 20 feet high. Gray concrete, rebar cores, industrial drainage pipes. Functional as hell and ugly as sin. From my porch, it looked like some brutalist fortress rising out of the earth. From the luxury balconies uphill, it looked even worse. Their precious panoramic lake view slowly disappeared behind what locals started calling the Cinder Block Forest. God, I love that nickname. Folks at Miller's Diner started taking bets on how long before Ridgeline Horizon lost their minds completely. Real estate agents stopped bringing clients by during daylight because the view now looked like a prison yard designed by Soviet architects. One leaked listing photo made its way around social media, showing a $1 million outdoor kitchen facing directly into 30 feet of gray retaining wall. The comments were ruthless. Luxury fallout shelter chic. Modern penitentiary aesthetic. Perfect if you've always dreamed of drinking wine beside a Home Depot loading dock. Buyers backed out fast. Contracts collapsed. Investors panicked. One rumor said 2 partners threatened to sue Ridgeline Horizon internally because property values tanked almost overnight. And through all of it, every single county official repeated the same sentence. The retaining structures are compliant under erosion mitigation guidelines, which was bureaucratic language for, you idiots caused this yourselves. Vanessa showed up one final time about 2 months later, except now she looked exhausted in a way money can't hide. She asked if I'd consider modifying the wall heights during settlement negotiations. I remember sipping coffee on my porch while she talked and honestly enjoying the silence between her sentences. Then I asked her a question. Do your clients still have uninterrupted views? She didn't answer. Didn't need to. By the end of summer, Ridgeline Horizon agreed to a massive settlement package. Environmental fines, full restoration costs, mature cedar replanting, long-term soil stabilization funding, the works. They even had to pay for specialty transplant crews to bring in partially mature cedar trees because the county wanted accelerated ecological recovery. Cost them an absolute fortune. And here's the funny part. After all that money, all that destruction, all those lawsuits and delays, the hills still never looked the way they wanted. Because I kept part of the cinder block forest standing. Not all of it. Just enough. Enough to remind everybody driving past Belmere Lake exactly what happens when greed mistakes quiet people for weak people. Sometimes revenge doesn't look like screaming or violence or courtroom drama. Sometimes it looks like a perfectly legal 20-foot concrete wall sitting directly in front of a millionaire's sunset view. You know, the older I get, the more I realize stories like this aren't really about trees or property lines or even money. They're about respect. Or more specifically, what happens when people with power stop believing they owe any to anybody else? Because the truth is, Ridgeline Horizon could have handled this differently from day one. They could have talked to me like a human being instead of an obstacle standing between them and a higher sale price. They could have designed around the landscape instead of trying to dominate it. But arrogance has this weird side effect. It convinces people they're entitled to remove anything inconvenient. And once somebody starts thinking like that, they stop seeing communities, history, families. They just see assets and visual obstructions. The lesson here is that small-town folks aren't stupid just because they don't wear expensive watches and corporate fleece jackets. A lot of us know the land better than the people trying to buy it. We know where the water moves during storm season, where the roots run deep, where the old survey pins are buried. And developers underestimate that knowledge all the time. Honestly, that's the psychological trap wealthy organizations fall into themselves. They mistake silence for surrender. They think politeness means weakness. They assume regular people won't push back because fighting takes time and money and energy. And to be fair, most people can't afford those battles. That's what makes situations like this so dangerous. One bad actor with enough funding can permanently damage a community before anyone catches up legally. From a legal perspective, property rights and environmental protections only matter if somebody is willing to enforce them. Paper laws don't defend hillsides. People do. And maybe that's why I left part of that concrete wall standing even after the settlement. Not because I enjoyed ruining somebody's luxury view. Okay, maybe a little. But because every time someone asks about that ugly gray structure, the story gets told again. It becomes evidence. A reminder. You can replace trees with concrete, but you can't replace 40 years of roots overnight. So now I'm curious. What would you have done in my position? Would you have taken the money and moved on? Or built the wall too?